So these are the basic steps of the due diligence, or how you do an M&A. The one thing I'll point out about this is these things tend to gather a lot of momentum on their own. So when a company makes the decision to approach another company and begin the due diligence process, the research shows that those deals have a high probability of going through. So this is not something that you just kind of play around with. When you approach another company, typically with a letter of intent, and they allow you to begin due diligence, because due diligence is a very revealing process, often the deals go through. And that's interesting because if you notice, that's before the details of the deal get negotiated. Again, here's a little bit from my good friend Dilbert on their view of M&As. So you can see it's well established in the business press that these things don't always go all that well. So why don't they go well? Well, the first is that you pick a target that just doesn't fit. It's too diversified, it's too large, the culture isn't going to work together. These sorts of things should have kept you from approaching them in the first place, but it happens. Then in the due diligence phase, because like I said, it tends to gather momentum, the issue is that companies miss red flags. They miss that the books aren't right. Certainly that was the case with HP several years ago when they had a horrible acquisition of a British company, and they basically said, we didn't pick up that they cooked their books. No excuse on that one, folks. So getting through the due diligence phase so quickly that you miss things. You don't negotiate properly, and I'm going to talk more about the details of this in a minute. But then a lot of times the problem is in the integration phase. This is when people are exhausted, the newness has worn off, but this is really when the nitty-gritty work begins, particularly if you're trying to do something involving people. If it's a very people-intense process, you've really got to work these sorts of details hard. So want to know why M&As go badly? These tend to be the reasons. Now, why they go well tends to vary based on the type of M&A rationale that you're using. I'll let you read the slide. I think those words are all self-evident. But again, you want to remember the reason they're going to succeed is going to align with the basic rationale for pursuing it. There are a few things, though, that tend to be true of all M&As and why it's important to pay attention to them. The first rule is don't overpay, and you'll often hear that as the acquisition premium. I illustrate this with the Dell Pro Systems merger. Before Dell's interest was known to the public markets, the highest or the last closing stock price for Pro Systems was $17.91. Dell's offer was for $30 a share. So that is a 68% premium over the closing price before Dell's offer became publicly known. So what Dell is basically saying is, put together, this little thing, this Pro Systems, is worth 68% more than it is over here. That's a lot of money to pay. One rule of thumb says anything over 25% is excessive, but I don't think that's a fair statement because you have to get into a little bit of the scale. Let's face it, if Facebook could have bought a company for $10 million and ended up paying $20 million instead, is that a big deal? Not really, not to Facebook. It is to the investors in that other company, but not to Facebook. But as the prices go up, you have to be very careful. Why? Companies take on a lot of debt, and when they take on a lot of debt, that means they take on a lot of debt service, and they become vulnerable as so much of their profit is tied up in simply servicing the debt. What tends to result in too high an acquisition premium? Hostile takeovers, which I'll illustrate in just a minute, and having multiple bidders. And that's where the concept of the winner's curse comes about. Congratulations, the deal went through. You won it. You lose because you overpaid. Then when you have a hostile takeover, what typically happens is the company keeps resisting and the price keeps going up. In the case of when Kraft eventually bought Cadbury through a hostile takeover, they paid a 45% acquisition premium for Cadbury. Whatever you do, it's important to do it quickly because when these things get rolled out, what does everybody's focus become? All the water cooler talk becomes, what about this? Am I going to keep my job? Are you going to keep your job? Blah, 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 blah. And the company isn't keeping up with the business. And then again, to emphasize, get it done. I think this is interesting. I saw this article several years ago where Jack Welch was writing about M&As. If you're not familiar with who Jack Welch is or was, he was the CEO of General Electric from about 1980 to about 2000. That was a period of tremendous profitability and growth and in General Electric. And Jack Welch was hailed as probably one of the best CEOs of his era. Notice that his reasons align almost perfectly with what I've already told you. And then finally, because humans are involved, this is where managers often make bad decisions. One is this pursuit of size. It's bragging rights, it's perceived job security. Um, the second is ego gets in the way, or to use a more politically correct term, hubris. And this is where CEOs say, nobody else can make this job work or could make this merger work, but I can. And the answer is usually not. And then this idea of job protection. People get strongly invested in sometimes taking radical steps to keep the company from going down the tubes. Remember, as an investor, it's no big deal to sell your stock. As the CEO of a failing company, that's a stain that lasts a long time. So this brings to a discussion the end of chapter 6. I hope I've opened your eyes that you read the Wall Street Journal with a new appreciation for all the things that companies are doing to try to improve their performance. That there are no panaceas. There's no silver bullet that if only I do X or Y, I'm sure to soar. But when handled well, things like diversification strategies and M&As can in fact be very positive for companies.